joined by Martin Gallegos, who covers the athletics for MLB.com. Martin, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Alan, thanks for having me. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. So let's start here, Martin. A bunch was going on last night. You've been covering this team since their last days in Oakland. We've had you on the show, friend of the show. We love when you can come on and break down everything that we're hearing, everything that we're seeing, but under the guise of someone that's kind of seen this team evolve. Give us your overall thoughts on everything that happened last night outside of the actual game.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the game is one they'll want to forget, but I think you just obviously take in. Obviously, there's a lot of anticipation for this day. I mean, since last year when this thing was announced, and a lot of intrigue as to how everything was going to work out. How was the field going to look? How was the upgrades going to look? The clubhouse, and I think from that perspective, from the players seeing the amenities, the upgrades, and the atmosphere and the crowd, I think it all went pretty well. I mean, the crowd was electric. I mean, I wish it was a better game because I know they were trying to get into it, and it seemed like there were certain moments like the Jacob Wilson home run and Max Muncy's double where it was like, man, they're about ready to explode. It's about to feel like a Kings game up in here if they can get something big here. But the overall, the opening day presentation, the festivities, they did a cool Ricky Henderson tribute. They had so much going on before the game, and I think overall, for a first go, I mean, obviously there were some things that they want to fix going forward, but I think the players and coaches overall were kind of pleased with how day one went outside of the game. And now it's just going to be, hopefully they get to, feel a little bit more comfortable, feel a little bit more normal without the whole opening day stuff, and just kind of get to, utilize this new home that they have.
Real quick, and, a lot of people were watching the A's for the first time last night, and you see Joey Estes kind of struggle. We were talking about how that fifth starter role for the A's, they weren't really sure who it was going to be. Just to everybody that was their first time watching the A's, can you just help them feel better about last night? The A's have a pretty darn good pitching staff. Luis Severino will go tonight, and the A's, they weren't going to manipulate their rotation just for last night, but last night wasn't really an indication of what they should be seeing for majority of the season.
Yeah, I mean, especially the way the first four games played out. That's why it was kind of shocking last night, because you look at the series in Seattle up there, and they pitched so well, whether it was the rotation or the bullpen. I think I looked it up. They walked as a total pitching staff. I think they walked like 16 guys over 4 games in Seattle, and last night they walked 10 in like 8 innings. So it was just kind of from the jump it was tough. Joey Estes, his velo was down, and he really didn't have command for any of his pitches outside of the fastball. So I mean, the Cubs were kind of just sitting fastball on him, and they were just kind of teeing off on him, unfortunately. And after that, the bullpen came in, and it was kind of uncharacteristic. All these guys started walking, a bunch of guys, and just allowing the momentum to build for the Cubs. And just obviously it turned into a blowout pretty early. So I think you're going to see a lot more better pitching performances going forward. I think this is a much improved pitching staff. They showed that the first 4 games. The Cubs, they have a really good lineup as well. I mean, you got to give some credit there. And also this park, I mean, as we saw last night, if the wind's blowing out a little bit, the balls might fly out a little bit more consistently than we saw, certainly at the Coliseum. So that's going to be an adjustment. But yeah, I think it was kind of to the extreme yesterday. I don't think you're going to see the A's pitching walk that many guys, and I think you're going to see them lock in a little bit more going forward here.
Talking to Martin Gallegos, who covers the A's for MLB.com. Martin, let's stay on the park, because I know that Lawrence Butler said he had heard that it played true. I know the River Cats, they play in a very offensive league in AAA, but their field specifically isn't viewed as the most offensive one, but compared to Major League ballparks, maybe it is. I saw the Jacob Wilson home run only would have been a home run at Sutter Health Park. So how does that kind of change how this thing is viewed the next 3-4 years here, with teams using it to their advantage, whether it be the A's who get to play all their home games here, or other teams as well? That pitching, you got to be careful. But how did you feel like that field held up last night?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting. I mean, like you said, the Wilson stat, I saw that on Statcast. That was interesting. But I think you got to take it to the elements as well. I mean, it was a weird day yesterday. I mean, it was really windy. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be like that most days. And then obviously in the summertime, it's going to get hot. So that's when I think people expect the ball to fly a little bit more consistently. But I think before we get to those summer months when the heat starts to come, I think the feeling is still that it's going to play somewhat fair. I mean, look, it's going to be way more hitter friendly than the Coliseum, which is what we were
Right.
used to. So that's just a given. But I don't think the games like you saw last night are going to be very consistent. I think a lot of that was just, and we had talked to Kotsay about this last night. It was more just pitchers were leaving pitches over the middle of the plate. I mean, those are going to get crushed anywhere. And that was just, poor pitching on the A's part last night. And the Wilson one did kind of seem like a wall scraper, and maybe it doesn't go out anywhere else like Statcast says. But I think on a more normal night where it's not as windy as it was yesterday, I know it's still a little rainy today, but I think next week when the Padres and Mets come into town, maybe it gets a little bit more normalized. I don't think it's going to be as extreme as you saw last night, but I mean, offense will be up. So, and I think that'll play to an advantage to this A's team. I mean, they have a really good lineup, a lot of guys who can hit homers, a lot of power. So I think they're planning to kind of take advantage of that as much as they can, as much as the other team might when they come into town.
Martin, can you confirm, and I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head, anybody on the A's using torpedo bats? Do you know that?
I don't think anyone used them last night, but I know there's guys talking about ordering some, and it's not a surprise. I mean, you see it all around the league. I think this next week you're going to see so many guys show up with those bats. So I won't be surprised if you see a couple of A's guys show up with those bats at some point. I mean, it's just crazy to see kind of how that's all taken over, baseball the last few days.
Talking to Martin Gallegos, who covers the A's for MLB.com. Martin, like I said, a lot of the listeners and a lot of the fans that were watching last night on TV or even in the building still getting used to watching this A's team. And obviously you've been covering them for a good bit of time here. What would you say the A's biggest weakness is going into this season?
Well, I think the pitching is kind of still, unknown. I mean, you look at the bullpen outside of Mason Miller, they got some decent arms, but not guys with outside of like maybe TJ McFarland, not a lot of guys with a lot of track record. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, to see something like that last night, it's not too shocking when you consider the inexperience. I mean, you look at Noah Murdoch, he just made his major league debut. You look at Mitch Spence, he was a rookie last year. Joey Estes was first full season last year. So there is some inexperience on the pitching side. I know they brought in Severino and Jeffrey Springs to kind of be the anchors of that rotation and one turn through. I mean, they were both dominant in Seattle. So you kind of hope that carries over again here in these next two games, and that they can kind of help mentor those young pitchers on the staff. But I think you look at the offense is great. And even the defense is much improved. I know they made a couple of errors yesterday, but in that Seattle series, I mean, they were making a lot of really game-saving type plays, really, on the infield and the outfield. So I think it's kind of the pitching. You hope that these guys can develop. Some of these guys still developing at the major league level, and you hope the guys like Severino and even Sears, and Springs can kind of anchor, that load and kind of help that rotation guide them through this whole season. Because I mean, a lot of these guys are not used to playing a full major league season. For a lot of these guys, it'll be their first full year in that pitching staff. So I mean, they're expected to hit those ups and downs that any young pitcher is going to hit.
I keep saying, Martin, that Jacob Wilson, every team needs a good young stud shortstop. And the A's have that. Last season, he gets called up, derailed a little bit due to injuries. But I keep trying to tell everybody that will listen, this kid is a stud, and you don't realize, you go all the way back across the bay here and how they thought Marco Luciano was going to be their savior at shortstop. Didn't end up working out. If you can get one of these guys, the Ellie De La Cruzes, guys like that, it really builds a foundation of your team. Just how good could Jacob Wilson be?
I mean, it's incredible to watch him hit. I mean, the guy never. I don't think he's struck out yet so far in these 5 games. And in spring training, I think he's only struck out like twice. And I mean, it goes back to college. The guy never strikes out. He always puts the ball in play. Which, I mean, the old saying is, you put the ball in play, good things will happen, right? And that's his game. I mean, he always goes up to the plate, ready to hit. He's got a unique batting stance. I mean, very few guys have ever had that. He's got that kind of twitch in his step, but it works for him. I mean, he's been doing that since he was a kid. With his dad. So it works for him, and he's added a little pop. I mean, you saw the home run yesterday. I know it was kind of a cheapy home run, but we saw him in spring hitting the ball with a lot more force. He gained about 15 pounds, worked on, strengthening his body for this year. So, I mean, he might be a guy who could hit, close to 300 or maybe hit 300, play really solid defense at short and hit you 10 to 15 home runs. And that's kind of the type of table setter you want when you have a lineup with guys like Brent Rooker, JJ Bleday, Lawrence Butler, Shea Langeliers. Have a guy set the table for those guys and create some extra runs. And he's not the only top prospect. I mean, they've got a guy in AAA, Nick Kurtz, who's just going off in Vegas early on. And I think we're going to see him up here relatively soon. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him before June, just based on, the excitement with him. And that's another guy who could be a potential superstar. So those top two prospects between Wilson and Kurtz, I mean, they've got a pretty encouraging foundation that they're forming here.
Martin, one more before we get you out of here. Great stuff as always. The A's can surprise some people if ... fill in that blank.
I think if the rotation goes as far as Severino and Springs takes them, I think that's the main thing. And it's always pitching. It always comes down to pitching for teams that make to the playoffs. You can have a really good offense, which I think the A's do. I think they could be a top 10, maybe even top 5 offense. I think they have that type of potential, but it all comes down to starting pitching, really, and pitching overall, the bullpen as well. But the starters have to, take you deep into the season. They have to develop some consistency. I mean, you're not going to go through the same 5 guys all year. So some of these guys who you see in the rotation right now are probably not going to be in this rotation, at some point, maybe in a month or two. But those top 2 guys, Severino and Springs, those are, top of the rotation guys who you need to take you deep into the season. And if they're going to make the playoffs, it's going to be because those 2 guys are healthy and they're consistently giving you quality starts every time out.
Martin Gallegos, you in the building again tonight?
Oh, yeah, I'll be out there.
All right. Well, hopefully the A's can get that first W. Martin Gallegos, who covers the A's for MLB.com. Martin, thank you as always. Got to have you back on the show multiple times this season as the A's will be doing their thing out there in West Sacramento. We'll talk to you soon, Martin.
All right. Sounds good. Anytime. Good talking to you.
That was Martin Gallegos, who covers the A's for MLB.com. When we return, a little bit of Kotze's cuts. What did Mark